Welcome to the game. This is the show where we go play-by-play analyzing the game of politics. On today's show, we're going to be covering a wide range of topics. We're going to be starting with Trump taking control of the D.C. police. And now, within 24 hours, he will be meeting face-to-face with Putin in Alaska. At the same time, Democrats, they're looking for their leader. They're looking for the standard bearer of the party as they try to move forward. And on the topic of immigration, it continues to be a heated topic where both parties are fighting not just over policy, but over public opinion. We have a lineup of guests, which I'm very excited to introduce right now. Christian Daytalk is the Washington reporter, or the White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Previously, he was with the Daily Caller, where he also covered the White House, Congress, and campaigns. Christian, thank you for being on the show.
No problem, Wadi. Happy to join you, my friend.
And we also have Marco Ferreri. He is a Democrat strategist and analyst. He's also the former Hispanic media director for the DNC. Marco, thank you for joining us.
Wadi, happy to be with you.
Thank you both. Let's kick it off with Trump taking control over the D.C. police. Now, this is a topic that has received praise from the president's allies, but critics from those who disagree with his moves. Christian, I want to start with you. This is something that the president caught some people by surprise, but others have pointed to that this is something that the president, even in his first term, kind of talked about a little bit, and that even in the campaign season, when he spoke about crime, he sort of talked about the need for a takeover, something where he had to step in. There's a lot of narratives that are kind of popping around this subject. So, Christian, I want to ask you, what do you believe is the main intention of the president? Is it zeroed in on Washington, D.C., or do you think this is just the beginning, a first step for the president, and this is something we might see in other cities?
I think it's twofold, Wadi. I think, one, the president has been sort of obsessed with this quote unquote beautification project that he's undertaking in the city. And it's not just this focus on crime. It's things like taking over the Kennedy the Kennedy Performing Arts Center, and also trying again to rewrite, resurface all of these federal buildings here, review the history exhibits at the Smithsonian museums. He's doing this all ahead of the 250th anniversary of our country next summer. But I also think he's trying to throw Republicans a bit of a lifeline ahead of the 2026 midterms, because let's be honest, we've seen this move from Donald Trump before. Focus on crime, link it to immigration, and he thinks that's an issue where Republicans have a clear advantage electorally. But I throw a little caution here because, yes, in 2020 and even 2024, crime was a huge issue for voters. And while it's still, I want to say in the top 10, it's not polling nearly as high as issues like immigration itself or, say, inflation in the economy. And I do think that there is, some chance that Donald Trump shoots himself in the foot by focusing on an issue that most voters aren't, have listed as their number one priority ahead of the midterms. So it's a little bit of a twofold strategy. As so far as his threats to expand this to other cities, I think that's, again, part of this political aim. He's needling Democratic frontrunners for the 2028 nomination. And again, just trying to refocus the narrative off himself, his, I don't want to say sliding because he's been kind of consistent, but certainly underwater poll numbers, and help Republicans down the ballot next year.
Yeah, and I think those are valid points, which actually brings me straight to Marco. Marco, when you think of the Democratic strategy in response to Donald Trump, I've seen most of the narratives kind of being focused on the fact that they're pointing, especially in cities, D.C. being one of them, Baltimore, Chicago, New York. Several of these mayors have pointed to the fact that they have seen homicides go down, carjackings go down. The narrative they're driving is that there isn't a need for this. Cities are safer than they were before. There is numbers, but then there is perception. There is what the folks might be feeling locally. Do you think Democrats are wise to continue on driving their narratives that everything is okay? Or should they kind of lean in and talk about maybe partnering with the president? What do you think is the best approach that Democrats should take to kind of Christian's point? they also need to be careful because in the past, on the issue of crime, it sort of seemed like Republicans have been able to make a couple of gains.
Yeah, I agree, Wally. So first thing is there's two sides to this, especially in DC, the perception and the actual data. I think the president is taking very visual events that we've seen in DC the last couple of months, weeks. You have the situation with the Dodge um, bureaucrat that was assaulted a couple weeks ago. You have the situation of the intern that tragically died in a shootout coming up from, I think, from the subway a couple months ago. You also have the situation of a congressman getting, I think, carjacked. I think it was last year in Navy Yard. So you have these big issues that are covered by the press, and it feeds the vision that DC is out of control. Then you have the carjackings, which is a big issue actually in DC. So that's the perception people have. The actual data, which is what the Democrats are saying, is that numbers are down. Yes, they're right. They're down compared to 2023 when you compare 2024 with 2023. But the reality is, in the DC and in some of these cities, is that the numbers are still higher than what they were before the pandemic. So it's not a strong argument. I do think that all the situation right now is a distraction by the president. It's a reason to change the topic of discussion in the media. So what he's doing is setting up a trap for the Democrats. He wants them to say this. He wants it to defend the status quo that, oh, but crime is coming down. But the perception of the residents, of the people, and of the country is that the cities are still unsafe. We could debate this. I mean, I live in DC. As any other big city in the United States, there's safe places, there unsafe places. But their perception of what they're selling is that the city's out of control. And if Democrats are going to counter this with graphs saying that all the numbers are down, you're defending the status quo. You're in a way falling into the same trap that was set up for the 2024 election, which was defending, oh, we're fighting inflation, but it's coming down. Yeah, but people still feel the problem. So I think the Democrats here cannot fall for that trap. What they have to do is point out that the president is exceeding the authority, exceeding the need of what the cities actually need. Can the cities improve? Yes. Does it demand Trump taking control of the police department, sending National Guards to the National Mall, as we've seen the last couple of days? No. We need better governance. We need the mayors, especially Democratic mayors, to be good governors, protect their residents, so you don't give Trump the excuse to do this sideshow of sending military into one of the biggest cities of the country, so he can distract the people. So I think Democrats cannot fall into this trap. They just have to argue that it's not needed. What they need is collaboration. Instead of doing this, wasting all these resources, sending the FBI, DEA into the streets of Washington, D.C., is absurd. It's a waste of money. Collaborate with the mayor of DC and the other big cities. What do you need to make them safer? What do you need? Give them the resource, empower them, and that can help both sides. So I think Democrats cannot fall for this distraction. They need to implement better policy so you don't give Trump the excuse to intervene in your city.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what some of the Democrat mayors go beyond, or what they say beyond what they've already said now, because I think they're going to be the main spokespeople on this topic. They are the ones sort of in charge of their cities. They're the ones who have a lot of jurisdiction and authority in their cities. Again, cities like Baltimore and Chicago, these mayors have spoke up. I think we're going to continue to hear from them. Christian, I'm curious if you've heard, it is one of these topics that I believe it's interesting in the sense that in D.C., there is the Home Rule Act that it's been very clear that the president does have an authority to do this in D.C., but he's taken it a step further, at least his verbiage has, where he's talked about the possibility of going into other states. Have you heard any critics on the Republican side, or do you think we might see some Republicans who have issue if he goes beyond the Home Rule Act? One, so my question is kind of twofold. One, what do you believe will happen after 30 days? Because after 30 days, my understanding is he now has to go to Congress. This goes beyond him either just signing executive orders or taking jurisdiction that he has. Essentially, his jurisdiction sort of expires after 30 days and it now relies on Congress. Do you think the president has enough allies, with both majorities being Republicans, to give him this authority? So that's number one. And then number two, Republicans historically have been very focused on limited government. Have been very focused on sort of empowering states. If he were to go into other cities, it sort of seems like he's breaking a sort of conservative precedent. do you think at that point Republicans might start to speak up a little bit more?
You threw a lot at me, Wadi, so I'm going to try and go piece by piece. Let's start from the last question. I'm going to say that you won't really see much resistance to Donald Trump in this law enforcement push from the Republican Party proper. And I say that because, look, Trump has been breaking norms for what quote unquote conservatism is, at least for the last 7 months, if not his entire political career. I mean, just look at the guy's economic blueprint. It looks extremely capitalistic. It runs contrary to the idea that the free market should be guided by an invisible hand, and that if businesses want to do business in other countries to make as much money as possible, that's how the world works. But when it comes to specifically this push, I think we need to be important, and I kind of want to harken back to what Marco was saying, because I actually agree with you almost 100% on this. That if there's one point I take umbrage with, it's that you sort of said, Donald Trump, if not, and I'm paraphrasing, so I don't want you to jump down my throat, but you essentially said, Donald Trump is um, operating within his legal parameters as the president in D.C., but the verbiage, like Wadi alluded to, of taking this plan to other cities, that's where it gets him in trouble. And I want Democrats to point out the delineation between what Donald Trump is doing right now and what he's trial ballooning about potentially doing in the future. Because I do think, and this sort of addresses the second question by Maya Math Wadi, what will Donald Trump do once he comes up on this 30-day window for the federalization of MPD? He's going to go to Congress. He told us that, but he also told us at the Kennedy Center on Wednesday that he thinks he can get around Congress. So as it stands right now, nothing Donald Trump is doing is illegal. It's certainly unprecedented. No one has ever invoked the Home Rule Act, again, to take over MPD or to deploy National Guards as supplementary law enforcement assets the way Donald Trump is doing this week. So we need to sort of pump the brakes a little bit. And I think one of the problems for Democrats, this is in my opinion, in this second stab at the Trump administration, is that I think folks are a little tired of hearing the argument, we're opposed to this because Donald Trump is doing it. I would make the argument, having lived in D.C. for 12 years now, I feel safer now than I did in the immediate aftermath of COVID. When downtown was a ghost town, business had shut down, there was serious, societal problems coming out of the pandemic, which I do think can be attributed to that crime spike. That being said, we're in a better place, but really no crime should be tolerable. And I think then this is the point that I alluded to, Marco, that I think Democrats should be doing. We need to delineate between violent crimes, whether they are homicides or assaults, B&Es with deadly weapons, drug-related charges. That's different than, young kids running around, and even if they are technically breaking the law, no one gets hurt. And when you say, and I'm not saying you were saying this, Marco, but just generally, if you're saying crime isn't an issue in D.C. because it's better than it was last year, you lose most of the country. There are people who live and work here, but tourism is a huge part of D.C.'s economy. And we're going to drive people away from visiting this great city, taking part in our nation's monuments and treasures and histories that are told on and around the mall, if people think the city isn't safe. So much like it's a thin line for Donald Trump to walk, it's a thin line for Democrats to walk. Circling back again, can he really extend this with his legal authority? I haven't whip counted myself, but I would assume both majorities in Congress pulling potential Democrats like a John Fetterman, he could extend this if he wanted to. But again, I'm not so sure that's something Donald Trump should focus on. I agree. I think he's doing this right now as a distraction from, the way the war in Ukraine is going, or what's happening with Israel and Gaza, or even his own, sliding economic polling. So it remains to be seen, will he, harp on this a month down the road when we've got whole new headlines to deal with and narratives that the president can lean into, which might throw some red meat to his own base and distract them from problems that are hampering him in the polls and his ability to govern here in D.C. and across the country as well.
Yeah, without a doubt, this is going to continue to be a topic that will be, I think, in the headlines. In 30 days, it will be interesting to see what the president says. Who are his allies in Congress? If he's able to pull one or two Democrats in the Senate, or a couple of folks also in on the House side. There's a lot of 2026 competitive races that a lot of folks are going to be looking at, and they're going to want to be voting in a way that they can go back to their districts and say that they were on the right side on some of these items. But I do want to turn now to the main event coming tomorrow, which is Trump meeting with Putin. We remember in February of 2022 that the war in Ukraine began with Russia entering Ukraine in an invasion on their attack on Ukraine, which this means we've now been in this space, one during the Biden administration and now during the Trump administration. Marco, you've been analyzing and looking at this topic since 2022. The president was someone who campaigned on that he would quickly bring a ceasefire on this topic. We didn't see it early on in his campaign. We haven't seen it now or at the beginning of the administration, I would say. Do you believe this is something that Trump can deliver on? Many folks have kind of talked that he has this, I don't know if they say bromance with Putin, in the sense that kind of admires the strongman sort of dictatorship that he's had in Russia, or the amount of power that he has in Russia. Do you think going in tomorrow, Trump will be able to negotiate? He will be able to bring something that's beneficial to Ukraine, that's beneficial to the amount of investment that the United States has given to Ukraine?
Oh, first, Wally, the first thing is, this is one of his biggest promises. Some Republicans said, oh, it was hyperbole, he was exaggerating, obviously it was never going to happen. But at the end of the day, it was a promise to end this conflict. It's already been 7 months in power. We haven't seen any progress. We've seen actually him going towards the side of Russia, using talking points from Russia, thinking that that might be beneficial. It has not played out. Now you're seeing him maybe taking a tougher stance. But to the question, do I think he can deliver? I mean, I hope, I wish the president can do that. As an American, somebody that wants peace, we hope the president can deliver. But the reality is, this is not a business deal. This is a historic issue with historical trends that go back hundreds of years, more complex than just what he might want to play it out as. I think we're already going into that meeting losing, because we are hosting Vladimir Putin in the United States, in Alaska. So he's coming to our country. We're legitimizing him. One says he is a war criminal. He is a dictator. Nobody can negate that. And we are hosting him in Alaska. That's one thing. And we're also giving him one of the biggest things he always wanted, is to showcase to the world that this is between the United States and Russia, two superpowers. He's showcasing what he always wanted, that the world is controlled by two major powers. The biggest victim, which is missing in this first meeting, because we hope there's another meeting, is Ukraine. So Putin is already coming into this winning, because he's being legitimized by Donald Trump. What's the best outcome out of this? We hope that in this meeting, President Trump can achieve a ceasefire. That, I think, will be at least the minimum goal. That would be the best thing, and not conceding any land. We've heard the last couple of days of him talking about maybe land swaps. That would be a losing deal, not only for Ukraine but for the West in this conflict, because we've financed Ukraine not only for 3-4 years to defend their homeland, but they've actually been in conflict for more than a decade now. So that's something that Zelensky will not be able to sell to their people. So it's at the end of the day, it's a losing strategy to actually concede this, because there is going to be no way of the president of Ukraine selling that to its people. They've been fighting for a decade to keep their country. And now you're going to tell them, oh, you have to cede X amount of territory. You're going to cede this area of the country. That's going to be an issue. So I think, being realistic, the best outcome we could get is an actual ceasefire. The worst outcome is actually Trump agreeing to give up lands, with Ukraine not being in the meeting. Another bad outcome would be that happening and not getting any assurance that Russia's going to do this in the future, because we have to remember that did not start 3 years ago. This started a decade ago when they started invading, when they took Crimea. This has been an ongoing issue. There has been already ceasefires. There has been agreements that Russia has broken. So we are already conceding a lot by just sitting down with him without accepting a ceasefire. So again, I hope the president can achieve that, or at the minimum, a meeting between Putin and Zelensky so they can develop a ceasefire. But I think we are going into this already shorthanded. We already conceded a lot. The president does not have the experience, the knowledge of this, the historical context of this conflict, of the issues. We've had other individuals, other presidents with way more experience in these issues, and they have also faltered. So the reality, president, I think, is not as prepared as we wish we had him. But as an American, I think we can just hope that he can get that ceasefire, which would be a winning outcome for not only Ukraine but also for Europe. So, and at the end of the day, we have to, I think, emphasize that this is not only the future of Ukraine. What we do here can affect the future of Europe, because Russia, if you don't stop it now, if you don't stop Putin now, he can continue. And when we talked about this at the beginning of this administration, we always remember the issue of the Munich meeting between Hitler, Mussolini, Chamberlain, and France, where France and the United Kingdom decided it was better to concede something to Hitler and Mussolini, because they thought that could pacify him, that he would stop there. And we all know the story that was actually the beginning of World War II. So I don't think conceding space, giving concessions to dictators like Putin will get us anything good in the future. So I think that has to be kept in mind too.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a complex issue. It's a issue that has a lot of history behind it that many times we're not privy to. But the reality is that there is a war going on. The reality is that there is a need for a ceasefire. Christian, there's a lot of individuals who will not be at this meeting. Obviously, it's a Putin-Trump meeting, but there are many individuals that are part of NATO. Zelensky, who's not part of NATO, but is also obviously a key player here. But many of our allies in Europe have been on phone calls with J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, actually, beyond phone calls, was in person. I believe they met in the UK, but there's been a lot of conversations. There's a phone call that was also talked about yesterday, Wednesday, with President Trump and many leaders from the European Union, from NATO specifically. Do you think there's a trust from our allies on Trump? Trump did make several promises on sort of these parameters on that meeting. Do you think President Trump will stick to some of those promises? Do you think, again, our allies in Europe will come out satisfied with the possible outcomes of this meeting?
I don't want to say that our European allies trust this president 100%, but I do think they are learning to at least understand him in ways that wasn't necessarily the case during his first term. You mentioned that NATO conference call yesterday. We didn't get a readout from the White House. I mean, Trump did his usual Truth Social post. I had a great call with Mark Rutte and our allies, blah, 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 blah. But the readout from the European side is very positive, in my opinion. They essentially said that Donald Trump understands he cannot make an agreement with Putin about land swap concessions without Ukrainian parties in the room. They suggested that, both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were completely in line with that train of thought, and that's a positive development in my mind. And let's not be honest. I think, Marco, it's not necessarily a one-to-one comparison talking about this summit the same way the Allied powers tried to appease Adolf Hitler during the lead up to World War II, because Germany was an industrial power on the rise then, and Russia is a shell of a defeated former empire. I mean, let's be honest, the sanctions that are in place right now are severely limiting their capacity to wage war. So I generally see the shift that Donald Trump has taken over the last 2 months or so about this war in particular as a sign that he's finally getting on the same train as the good guys, so to speak. I'd put NATO in that. I would put Ukraine in that because, prior to entering office, I think anyone, regardless of your actual thoughts on the war, recognize that it's an absolute pipe dream that Donald Trump is selling voters, that he's just going to get in office and Vladimir Putin is immediately going to give up because America is back and we're so tough and we don't want to be messed with. And the president himself took a little bit of time to, I think, see through the fantasy he was weaving to grasp the reality of the situation. I don't want to pretend like Donald Trump hasn't cozied up to dictators, Putin himself in the past. Let's go back to that Helsinki sit down they had back in 2018. Lest we forget, Russia was already 3+ years into their invasion of Crimea at that point. So I think hosting Putin on U.S. soil in Alaska, you can make the case that it's legitimizing a dictator, but this isn't new for Donald Trump. And I think the language that he's spoken about this war, specifically his conversations with, of all people, First Lady Melania Trump behind the scenes, who of course, was born and grew up in Yugoslavia, another Eastern European, socialist country who had their own sort of perceptions of the Soviet Union. And she has moved the president on this issue because Donald Trump, he's talked to Putin, or at least through their intermediaries, for months now. And Putin is telling us one thing. And as the president says, I go home and say, I think that was a great phone call. And then another hospital gets hit by missiles. So Donald Trump wants to get Vladimir Putin in the room and try and see in this one-on-one meeting, is this sincerity? Is this BS? And how will the U.S. and our allies, primarily Ukraine and the rest of NATO, respond? Do we increase economic sanctions? Do we take more drastic moves to bump up, armaments to Ukraine? We're, of course, already selling weapons to NATO nations that Ukraine had previously requested, and they will disperse them to the battlefield until a ceasefire is reached. So it's certainly not an optimal situation. And I think Donald Trump is certainly to blame for the starting place on the negotiations regarding this war on January 20th when he got into office. But I'm heartened to see the direction that he's moving in, because ultimately Donald Trump, and you hit this nail on the head, there are men in this position significantly more versed in foreign policy, be they former Presidents Obama or Biden or their deputies or secretaries of state or anyone, but no one who has employed the traditional American FP approach to diplomacy has been able to move Putin off this position in the last 10 years. Maybe it's time to try something different because ultimately the status quo is untenable right now. Now, the last thing I'll say on this, and I apologize for getting a little long-winded, I'm not necessarily sure an immediate ceasefire with some land swaps isn't a better outcome than walking away from the negotiating table, rearming Ukraine, and continuing to allow soldiers to die. I mean, one is an economic or has a global economic impact. The other, is a real human rights cost. And I don't know how you can weigh the money behind the war with the lives that are being lost at the end of the day. So I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do think generally this is a positive step, a good direction we're heading in from this administration compared to where we started from.
Morgan, I want to ask you rather quickly before we move on to the next topic. Do you think Donald Trump has a little bit of a internal upper hand? I'm not speaking in relation to Putin. I'm speaking in the sense that I believe during the campaign, the president really pushed this America First narrative, America First campaign. And part of that was that this sentiment that we need to, the United States needs to kind of step away of the role that it's had historically in Ukraine. And by historically, I mean during the this war. Again, J.D. Vance just saying a couple days ago, if we need to pull back, if we don't come to negotiation, or if Ukraine is not on board with some of our terms, we can pull back. Why send U.S. American dollars, taxpayer dollars to Ukraine? Does that give the president, in your opinion, a little bit of sort of confidence that he could go in there, possibly get a ceasefire, or that he can walk away and say, I'm not dealing with this guy, so we're stepping away from Ukraine?
Oh, President Trump does have an advantage in that sense because he does have a leverage on Ukraine. At the end of the day, we're the ones supplying everything, and he can say that he does have a mandate from the people that they want to stop being involved in, as some perceive, a conflict that is pretty far away from our shores. The issue is that I think culturally the United States is so far away from what we lived through in the Second World War that people don't remember that when things happen across the Atlantic, it's just a bit of time will it affect us. So I think that losing that idea is also part of the the perception that Americans have on the war. I do think he has leverage. I do think that he has a mandate. Um, the reality is that if Ukraine tomorrow needed to, in a way, replace what it's getting from the United States, there's nowhere else to get it because the European industrial arms complex is not ready to supply Ukraine with what it needs for an ongoing conflict for Russia. So Ukraine, in a sense, does depend on what Trump thinks is a winnable concession, a concession from Putin in this conflict. So I do think he has leverage, um, but I think also that the image of the United States, as we know it, abandoning a country, can also, in the long run, become really negative for his administration and for the country. And I think there's still, even though the Republican Party has changed a lot in the last decade under him, become more isolationist, I do think that some people within the movement still think that a world where the United States retreats in a way that some areas of the MAGA movement have portrayed will affect them in the long run. Nobody's gonna like an administration that abandons weaker countries when we have portrayed America, at least for the last 100 years, as that protector. So I think it's not going to be too easy to dispense that image and because of the political risk. At the end of the day, that's the only thing he cares about. Let's be honest, the political risk and the political risk of Trump being the one abandoning a country to the whims of a dictator of a bigger country as Russia. I think he knows it. If he doesn't, people close to him will remind him that that's a political cost that he risks if he doesn't
Yeah.
take this seriously.
Yeah, it's the political cost and sort of narrative that comes out of this will definitely be part of the conversations that I think we'll continue to have. The next topic that we have, interesting enough, is a reflection of the fact that right now, when it comes to all these topics, everything that's happening in Congress, Republicans have the upper hand in the sense that they have control of the House, control of the Senate, and obviously of the executive branch with Donald Trump as president. President Trump consistently reminds the public of his win in 2024, points to the margins of how he moved in several states that previously Biden had won. He points to gains among Black voters, among Latino voters, and even specific regions, areas like Texas, where Republicans have historically won, but where he made gains beyond any other Republicans in areas like the Grand Valley. This means that for Democrats, they're looking to regain in areas where they haven't been able to make headway. They, again, have lost control of all branches when we're talking about the executive and the legislative branch. They've also had several losses when it comes even in governor's races. But the truth is, they are looking for a standard bearer. They're looking for that next leader. Marco, I want to go to you. There seems to be some individuals who might be taking the lead. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, kind of started this podcast tour at the beginning of the year. He wasn't in a suit and tie. He kind of was with the rolled up sleeves, had a wide range of guests, including Charlie Kirk, sat down and had kind of conversations that we hadn't heard Democrats had. But then across the country in New York, you have individuals like Mamdani, who, to many surprise, kind of towards the end, where he won the nomination on the Democrat side to be able to be that candidate for the New York City mayor's race. Who do you believe will kind of be that next front runner for Democrats as they go into 2026, when they're going to try to take control of the Senate, when they're going to try to take control of the House? Who do you believe is that standard bearer for the party at the moment?
But I hate to break it to the listeners, but we're not going to have a standard bearer before the midterm because at the end of the day, the goal right now for the Democratic Party is regain a foothold in Congress, regain the House, play for the Senate. It's going to be difficult, but that's the main goal. Because if you don't have that, you're gonna head into 2028 with nothing to offer, nothing in being having no power over the last 2 years of the Trump administration. The first goal is that, and that's going to play out really different than what we expect of just one person, because what sells in California to win some seats is not the same thing that sells in Florida if you're going to fight for a Florida district. So I think the first thing we're not going to see a standard bearer before the midterms. Obviously, we have some already prominent figures being on the media, throwing out their ideas. I think Newsom is primed to be one of those leaders. Why? Not only is he the governor of probably the strongest state, the most economic prominent state of the country, but he deals with all the issues that you're eventually going to deal with as a president: immigration, trade, issues with the big cities, security, but also now with the issue brought up by the Republicans with the gerrymandering, redistricting. That's going to give Newsom a platform, because if Texas goes ahead with it, which it looks like it's going to do, you're going to have California also do the same thing. So in a sense, Newsom has an opportunity to be the leader within the party that can give the Democrats a way of regaining the House. So I think he's positioned there very positively into the midterms and head into the primary for the president. I think you also have figures like Pritzker, you have Shapiro. I think the governors, this is going to be a primary where the governors are going to have a lot of attention. So if you ask me, Shapiro, Newsom, Bashir in Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, those are prominent names that we're going to see. I don't think the Democratic Party is going to go with anybody in the legislative unless something changes in the next couple of years. Other names, I think one I always like to bring up is Rahm Emanuel. He was pretty important, prominent in the Obama administration, congressman, mayor, ambassador. And I think from what I've been hearing, and this is the other fight within the party, is the fight of the idea. What are we proposing is we have to recognize what the 2024 election told us. The electorate was not happy with the Democratic Party. They're still not happy. The polls show it. I think one of the main reasons, and this you see a lot of talk about this, like the Democratic Party forgot about the vision and just became an obstructionist, an opposition party to the president. We understand, for the people that don't like the president, they're always going to be against the president. That's your base. But what are you selling them apart from? Donald Trump is mad. What is the vision of the Democratic toward the future? That's, I think, something the party has to build towards the midterms and towards the presidential election. You have the fight, obviously, of the old ideas, the progressives, people with new ideas. So I think, going back to Rahm Emanuel, he's hit it on the head. I think it's the American dream is dead. The reality is that people pay attention to the affordability crisis, the ability of them to get a good job, the ability to send their kids to school, to feel safe. Those are the main issues. So, and he always says this phrase, like, we're talking too much about bathrooms, but not about the schoolrooms, the classrooms. That's the issue. I mean, people care about those tabletop issues, and I think Democrats, we have to recognize that we deviated from that. We deviated into intangible issues that do not affect the day-to-day lives of the average American, and we have to go back to that. People need to hear how we're going to give them good jobs, how we're going to create industries of the future, how you're going to build the infrastructure of the future, all of that. So I think that's a fight that you're going to see within the party of ideas. I think Rahm Emanuel has a good point there. The issue of Mandami is also very complicated, because I think you see the surge of that populist wing of the party, which obviously in this desperate moment for the party where there seems to be no direction of how to react to Donald Trump, you have the populist wing, I think now led by Mandani, that is giving another option. In my personal opinion, this is me, and might get hits from other Democrats, I don't think that's the way to go. I do recognize that Mandani has revolutionized the way of campaigning. He is talking about the issues that people care about, but he did not invent affordability. He's not the first one to talk about it. He's been affected at it, but this is not his idea. A lot of people already talked about this. So, but the issue with him is what's behind in the proposal. They're not practical. They've been proven to not work. So, for example, the grocery stores, that's a bad idea. That has not worked. That's proven to not work. Free buses, there's other ways of helping people. Why are you going to subsidize people that are economically well off? What you should do is try to help the lower income if that's your goal. But subsidizing everything at a huge cost is not the way. Then you have the housing issue. I think there's other ways of solving. I'm more on the side of, instead of limiting the prices, the rent prices, you have to actually solve one of the bigger issues that we have in modern times in the States, is that we've created a governing strategy that we limit the ability of people to build new properties. We need to release, unchain the supply side. We need to actually have more buildings. We have to make it, the zoning easy. We need to make the permits easier. I think that would be my idea. So I don't think the rent control is an issue that will be beneficial. And at the end of the day, I don't think he has the experience to lead a city as complex as New York. It's our biggest city. And to that point, I just go into the midterms and the eventual presidential election. If he wins, a person that calls himself a socialist, you're giving the Republican Party a gift. So I think it'll cost us more than what it will benefit us. I don't think his proposals will be something positive for the city, and his way of doing politics will cost us. You're giving Trump and the Republicans a gift into the midterms and the presidential. So I hope other,
That's a gift.
yeah, I hope other,
That's a gift
other
that
things.
Republicans are looking for.
Yeah, and we're giving it to them. So I think obviously there's the options are not great, but at the end of the day, and this is my summary to this whole issue, is Democrats have to actually deliver. So if you're going to be mayor of New York, you're going to be governor of New Jersey, your goal now is not to fight Donald Trump. It's actually to deliver as somebody controlling the state or the city, so people can see that Democrats can deliver and bring benefits to the people. And that will get you votes in the midterms. That will get you votes in the presidential. So delivering to the people. Do not give the president easy fights, excuses to come into your cities, into your states to do things. Deliver to your people, and that will, I think, will bring benefits to the party when you are heading to the midterms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to bring Christian in here. Christian, do you think the White House, I mean, it's no secret, I'll say, that the White House is looking at the midterms. There's the entire conversation going on around gerrymandering. The president has been vocal on this topic. Do you believe when the White House looks at the current landscape and they do look at some of these individuals that Marco just talked about? I do think bringing up Ron Emanuel is very interesting. He was on the Megyn Kelly show, which has very high ratings at the moment. It looks like he's sort of trying to get his name out there a little bit more. But as the White House looks at the current landscape, where do you think they want things to go? Do they want Imandami to win in New York so that the president can kind of be, because he is on the ticket, typically in the sense that after the first midterm, after a presidential race, it's typically the president who the party kind of either has to defend or has to elevate. What outcomes or what individuals do you think the White House is either, I don't want to say afraid of, but keeping their eye on to see the way they kind of either rise? Is it a Newsom? Is it a Rahm Emanuel? Is it some of these folks that might be Hakeem Jeffries in the House? How do you think the White House views the current landscape when it comes to Democrats?
Well, Marco about named all of the big players that I think the White House might be quote unquote focusing on. I think they love Mamdani. Marco, everything you said is exactly what I'm hearing from both White House, staffers and Republican ops here in the district. They would love to run on an anti-socialism message in 2026. It takes the onus off their own policies, and let's be honest, the general disfavorable view that Americans, including even a growing number of Republicans, have on the big, beautiful bill, Donald Trump's, landmark tax package, which is going to raise the deficit by however many trillions of dollars. I've lost track at this point in time, and kind of seems like a general rejection of like the age-old Republican ethos on how you govern government spending, for lack of a better term. I think they laugh in the face of Gavin Newsom. I think someone who's been in that position as an executive in one of the biggest states in the country for 15 plus years now, as both a mayor in as a governor, someone who is openly fundraising and campaigning on, like you mentioned, Charlie Kirk's podcast to try and pull some of those middle of the road Republicans over. They think he's a joke. If there's one person, Marco, that you didn't mention, and I genuinely feel that she could shake things up for any number of reasons, it's someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I recognize this runs against what you were saying, Marco, about how the party needs to sort of tack to the center and not necessarily appease the more progressive wing in the party, because there are concerns about how those policies will play in flyover states or Midwestern states or any of the, Rust Belt battlegrounds. I think, like Mandani, she is someone who is obviously significantly younger. She understands not only how younger voters' minds work, but how they consume and how information is disseminated in the most, effective ways possible. I don't care if Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker are going on Charlie Kirk or Benny Johnson or trying to get on Joe Rogan now after the 2024 election, where everyone and their mother was informed that, yeah, this was the podcast, trip to the ballot box. I want people who understand these channels intrinsically. And I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has, obviously with her meteoric rise to Congress, made a name for herself on the national stage. But she has grown I don't want to say cultish, but a cult of personality around her, even as she's, to be honest, grown more towards the center, at least in terms of her voting record. She is someone who, folks go to for news or her reactions. She's just not someone who you see scrolling on Twitter. People search her out. I want to harken back to 2014. Republicans were in a very similar position to Democrats right now. They were out of the White House. They're out of power in Congress. And there was the debate, like, which way does the party go? There's massive dissentiment among this Tea Party movement of crazy people. And instead of tacking to the center, Eric Cantor, the Republican House leader, lost his primary. The Tea Party swept through Congress. I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing, but 2 years later, you get someone like Donald Trump, who, again, you take the policies out of it, is one of the most enigmatic, charismatic leaders we've ever seen, plucked out of a non-political world, even if he's going on Fox News, calling Obama an illegal immigrant or a plant or whatever it was, shout out birtherism, for like 3 or 4 years before he actually announced his run. And he changed the Republican Party to something that I think if Eric Cantor was looking at the GOP 10 years ago, he'd be like, I don't recognize these people. I don't recognize this platform. I'm not saying that is the route that Democrats need to go. It feels like they're in a very similar inflection point, one that could have serious long-term ramifications for the political structure in this country. And I think the White House is terrified about that, because the paradigm is shift. And the problem for Democrats has been they haven't been able to catch up. If Democrats can change the game again, Donald Trump is leaving office in 3 years. There's no guarantee that the next nominee, be it J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or someone else, will have his finger on the pulse in the same way that Donald Trump has, quite literally, singularly, compared to any other Republican coming before or after him. So it's the opposite side of the coin. And yes, a roundabout, concise into that ramble is that White House is very scared about the midterms and about who the eventual 2028 nominee would be. I think they would love to run against Kamala Harris again, but beyond that, the jury's still out about not only who can win a primary election, but go to toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. And to be honest, I can't wait to watch this thing play out.
Yeah, it's something we can all agree on is that the 2026 election is just getting started. It's in the sense of narratives are being brought up, candidates, and who is going to be the leaders, and what are the pros and cons that some of these parties are seeing in this space. Again, we'll continue to give coverage on that topic. I want to thank Christian and Marco, both of them, for their analysis today, for joining us on the show. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Again, this has been The Game, where we go play by play, analyzing the game of politics.